Welcome to our Global Ascend Together Forum to Stop Asian Hate. My name is Marco Soto, and I am part of the technical team supporting this program. You can connect with me through the chat if you need technical assistance. Before I introduce our program host, let me take a moment to share this important housekeeping and engagement information. Please take full advantage of the chat feature to engage with us in the program, as we value your feedback. We will have a couple of audience polls during the program. Please give us your thoughts on the questions and add to the discussion. Please feel free to ask our speakers about the discussion using the chat feature. They'll try to answer as many as they can. Please be sure to follow us across all our local or our social media accounts and share your reflections from this program. This program is being live streamed on our YouTube channel and recorded. If you know of anyone who would like to watch but didn't get a chance to register, they can do so at www.youtube.com/user/ascendleadership/live. Before we start the program, please join us in a moment of silence for the people of Ukraine. Now, to start the program, I'd like to introduce our MC and moderator, Dion Lim, who is a longtime Ascend supporter and has participated at numerous Ascend programs. Dion, the floor is all yours.
Marco, thank you so much. And to Ascend, hello everybody. It's so great to be here with all of you once again. And really my heart is bursting because I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing people from all over Richmond, Virginia, California, New York, over in Canada, everyone joining in today. So that gives me such a moment of pride knowing that there is so much interest in today's forum. So without further ado, welcome to this Global Ascend Together Forum to Stop Asian Hate. This really could not have come at a more necessary time because the title says it all. Hate knows no boundaries and combating it takes steadfast leadership. We have such a powerful program lined up for you today, and it actually, full disclosure, brought a number of us to tears while we were putting this program together. It is raw, it is about to get real, so hold on to your desks, hold on to your computers. I really encourage all of you to engage, leave us some comments you already have, but also leave us some questions in the chat below. We have a quick reminder, some housekeeping reminders. Please keep your camera turned on. Use that virtual background provided by Ascend. It really helps us feel united and bring us a little closer, even though we are physically apart. So for all of you who are not familiar with who I am, my name is Dion Lim. I'm a news anchor and reporter at ABC 7 in the Bay Area. I'm also the author of Make Your Moment. It's a book about my experience being my only voice in mostly white newsrooms and to be the first and only Asian American to be at the helm of 3 primary newscasts in different TV markets before coming to San Francisco. I mean, people used to yell at me on the street, "Hey, Connie Chung," because they had never seen someone like me on their television before. We will get to more of that a little bit later. But Marco, if we could pull up the first slide. As you can see here, I used to make my moment by covering a lot of entertainment news. 3 years on the red carpet at the Oscars, 2 years traveling with the Golden State Warriors as they made their runs in Cleveland and in Toronto. I've also covered some of the most major events in American history: California wildfires, women marching on Capitol Hill as Justice Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed. But as you can see from slide 2, when the pandemic hit and Asian Americans or being blamed for spreading the China virus, quote unquote, my world completely got flipped upside down. I broke some of the biggest stories in AAPI history, and this in turn, I discovered, opened the door for other journalists to do the same. On air, our talent may appear to be diverse on screen, the reporters, the anchors, but there is a problem with diversity in newsrooms across the country, where the people making the decisions on what to cover, people in those management positions, have not always found AAPI coverage as important. So what I wanted to do was fight to bring to light the racism and the xenophobia and how these verbal attacks became physical. Sometimes they led to death. And every day I would wake up and wonder, how many DMs, how many emails, how many messages would I get from people in my community alerting me to something so incredibly heinous? If we could get to slide number 3, I'd like to show you that it's not just a Bay Area issue, because outside the Bay Area, 1 week from today, March 16th, we will mark a very somber 1-year anniversary of the Atlanta spa shooting, which, as many of you recall, killed 8 people, 6 of which were Asian women. So I'd like to take a moment to have a moment of silence to remember them and to remember the victims of other hate crimes as well. Thank you for that. Now, this shooting happened, by the way, the very same week 3 Asian seniors in the Bay Area were violently attacked on the streets. And this was a very dark time for me because I realized that my mental health was really suffering. I remembered, though, how my mom always told me if I ever went to a psychologist, if I ever sought help and showed weakness, that I would be deemed this
Like how much time before you
crazy
Holy
person.
crap.
A quick reminder, everybody, if they could mute their microphones as well. I will get to more on the mental health aspect in just a moment, but I do remind everybody to take care, that there is no shame in admitting that, yes, these are some very challenging times, and to say that you are not okay is perfectly okay. So taking down that slide, coming back on camera, I should point out that these crimes targeting Asian Americans did not start or stop by any means with the Atlanta spa shooting. The Center for Study of Asian Hate and Extremism, all hate, in fact, reports there was almost a 340% increase in anti-Asian hate in 2021. That's compared to the year before. This is not by any means just a US phenomenon. It's happening in Canada. It is happening in other parts of the world. This is why we have Ascend leaders and members from Canada here with us today. Now, at this time in anti-Asian crimes, as these have become more and more visible, Ascend actually launched something called a 5-point action agenda. This was something originally formed to address the harm of COVID on diverse and underrepresented groups. This effort, though, brought to light some underlying issues around race and discrimination and hate that really do require a greater focus and a need for change in the workplace and society today. We are facing those issues head on. This effort was further amplified through the Ascend Impact Fund to combat anti-Asian hate and also support the Pan-Asian community. Today, the forum, we have nearly 200 companies and organizations represented from across industries. Many of you are supporters of these initiatives. That is pretty tremendous. So a silent applause for all of you for that tremendous accomplishment. Even so, though, I think despite this tremendous effort, I keep hearing over the course of the pandemic, oh, it'll get better, or when this trend dies down. But guess what? This is not a trend. It hasn't died down, and it is not going anywhere. And In slide 4, Marco, if we could pull that up, most recently, you may have heard on January 15th, Michelle Alyssa Go was brutally murdered when she was shoved onto the subway tracks in New York City. On February 13th, Christina Yuna, she was brutally stabbed 40 times to death in her New York City apartment. I'm almost losing my breath because the gravity is not lost on me. And I've worked so closely with the founders of Stop AAPI Hate, which tracks reported cases of discrimination. Their very latest numbers, which came out just about a week ago, show almost 11,000 hate incidents against the AAPI community since March of 2020. And most of them who reported were women. I hate this, that it is International Women's History Month, yet we are remembering victims of violence, but it is so crucial to this discussion. And as someone who's covered so many of these attacks, it is impossible not to take on these victims' pain. As these stories air, these people who look like you, who look like me, who look like our loved ones, our friends, our parents, this does not go away. You are in contact with them, and after the story airs, following the recovery, if they ever recover, these are people who still have lives. They still need to recover long after the TV has been switched off or the social media post is no longer viral. Back on camera for you. Earlier, as I mentioned, the struggle with mental health while covering some of these heinous crimes. I admittedly have cried on TV for the very first time, the thing you are not supposed to do, what they've taught you in school, but it's impossible not to. I remember telling the story of a young man who was brutally shot and killed for his cell phone. His name was Kelvin Chu, and his mother, sobbing, she had never told her story to anyone before, over a year, pulled down her sweater, and she showed me a small device on her chest, and she said she had heart problems because after his death, she felt like she should have been the one to be killed, not him. I remember feeling so much anxiety and so much pain, and I'm shaking right now as I remember that moment. I started hyperventilating. I could not breathe. I picked up the phone and I was in a hysterics with my boss saying, "Oh my God, I can't go on the air. This is impossible. I'm a mess." And it was a white man who was my manager at the time, still is, who talked me off the ledge and shared with me some of his own struggles, not ones from an Asian American lens, but his own during this time of COVID, during this time of seeing us cover these issues. And I realized that we are not alone. That was my ally. I had an ally. And it takes those small gestures within your workplace. That is what this forum is about. It's about sharing your life experiences, practical ways we can fight hate, not only on our own, but doing it collectively. Something that is so critical is that inter-Asian allyship, how Asian Americans can and really should be supporting each other, and how we can get that support from the community. Asian Americans have such a long history of challenges in this country, the model minority myth that was touched upon earlier on in this program, not feeling like we belong. We have been scapegoated, we have been victimized after major global tragedies. I think about how the Sikh community were beaten and killed, blamed for the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. I want you to all think about that right now and the times where you felt like you were not a part of the bigger picture of what it was to be an American citizen, like you did not belong. Like me, maybe it was something as simple as being told at school that your lunch of seaweed and pork buns smelled bad, or maybe someone called you a slur. For me, it was a kid who had one glass eye tell me that I was a chink in pigtails, and I never forgot that moment. These moments stay with you for a long time. Please share those moments with us in the chat. This is a safe space if you feel comfortable doing so. We all have a story to tell, and our message can be conveyed in a stronger way if all of us will share them. Someone who has not been shy in sharing these experiences is Anuja Burns. She is here to share with us her spoken word, "I Said Nothing," and it chronicles her experiences as an Indian female. As you listen to Anuja, please let us know what you think in the chat below, and Anuja, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Dion. Well, I'm so excited to be here. My heart is beating quickly, but without further ado, I'll jump in. I said nothing. You said Indian people have smelly houses. You grabbed your eyes and chanted Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees. Why do Indians have a red dot on their forehead? It's because their husbands say, you so ugly, as you poke me hard in the forehead. You nag the only two Asian kids in class to go out as they shrug their shoulders, making themselves small as you escalate your taunts, louder and louder. I said nothing. We said nothing. It's my fault I'm different. Let me absorb what makes me different. Let me hide who I am. I beg my mom not to make Indian food. I spray the house with air freshener before you come over. Heaven forbid I make you uncomfortable. In junior high in matching jean overalls, I take pictures at the mall with my white friends. I pass out prints to everyone I know. I am proud I have assimilated. We are invisible. No, we are not. We are Apu and Long Duck Dong, or if you're feeling gracious, we are Jackie Chan. You say I must be good at math. Yes, I'll take it. That's me. I'll be your model minority. I'm not the guy at the liquor store you make fun of. Don't wrap me up in those accents, in the smell of our food, in our features, in our color, in our shame. Hide the pain and embrace the model minority. At school, we learn about the colonization of India. The British brought buildings, they brought roads, they brought infrastructure, but I don't understand. They beat my grandparents and all those beautiful buildings. The Indians were not allowed inside or even to that part of the city. We were kept out in our own country. Why isn't our history reflected in our textbooks? Once again, I don't understand, but I said nothing. We said nothing. You grew up, you loudly exclaim, who warmed up fish in the microwave? You think you're complimenting me when you say you're pretty for an Indian girl. You chant USA and hide your racism behind your pride in our country. You call it the China virus and can't be bothered to pronounce our names. Always a joke, always laughing. We change our names at Starbucks, at auditions, at work. Let me hide who I am. Heaven forbid I make you uncomfortable. I said nothing. We said nothing. Last year, a white man targets 3 Asian spas, killing our Asian sisters. The next day, our great aunt and uncle are brutally attacked in San Francisco. And then our grandfather is kicked in the head. On Saturday, our disabled Asian brother has his car set on fire. On Sunday, our grandmother is hit in the face with a metal pipe. And yesterday, me and you were violently beat on the streets of New York while no one bothered to help us. We lay alone on the sidewalk in pain. Enough is fucking enough. Fuck assimilation and fuck your discomfort. We are doctors, we are lawyers, we are sex workers, and we are refugees. We deserve better. This is our country, and you better fucking believe that we are not invisible. And today, hear my voice. Hear my pain. All those years I stood by silently, now I'm shouting. But even if I whisper, you better fucking listen.
Wow. You just unloaded a lot there. I was also shaking, and as I heard your spoken word for a second time now, the impact certainly was not lost on me. I also want to say, if everyone has a moment to look at the chat, so many great comments. I think you inspired many people to share their stories. Deanna saying, my sister was bullied, having her face pushed in a mud puddle because it matched her skin. Inga saying, we say nothing. That is so true because we're taught to be silent and hide our emotions. Right now, it just feels like one big therapy session because we have so many of those shared experiences. Anuja, I know it's not easy to share those feelings after being marginalized for so long. Before we continue on, I do have to ask you, why did you feel so compelled to do this finally? And also use an expletive at that?
Great question. So after the Atlanta shootings, I'm in an Asian alumni group at Stanford, and I was asked to speak on a panel. And when they asked me, I didn't understand why I wanted to give up my spot. I felt, well, I'm Indian. I'm not the Asians that are experiencing these attacks. I have privilege. I'm American. I have power. I don't want to take up space in the room. And also, I questioned at that time, did I have it so bad? I have privilege. I have, I've had a great childhood. I've had a great upbringing. It's not so bad for us. And I think it's part of our culture to minimize our pain and our experiences. But then I started writing, and I'm by no means a writer. I don't write. And this just poured out of me, and the anger poured out of me, the tears poured out of me. And it's all these experiences that we just hold, or that I held inside, and I minimized my entire life. And it's like, you know what? I am angry. I do feel invisible. I do constantly morph myself to be sure others don't feel uncomfortable. And now here's my chance. Here's my chance to be real, to express that and not be scared. And it's been very powerful for me to, find my voice.
Yeah. And I do want to ask one more question too, is that I think, or maybe more so a comment, is that I think it's unexpected to hear that language. I think it's unexpected to hear that anger and that fire, because I know that for me, right, I'm smaller in stature. I think there's that stereotype that we're very meek or soft-spoken. So when I'm going up against the district attorney or someone trying to hold them accountable, shoving a microphone in their face, it gets a lot of attention. Have you gotten positive response, and has there been some criticism? Because undoubtedly there is going to be, no matter what we say.
Yeah, I think it overall tremendously positive. I think I've shared it with friends and family, and it opens the door to, talk about these vulnerable experiences. Criticism, I think some people, and surprisingly, East Asians have said like, oh, I don't think it's that we have it that bad, or oh, why are you focusing on the negative? You should focus on the positive. So, you do hear some of these things, but overall, overwhelmingly positive. And, I shared it with my kids. And even though, obviously they're not allowed to swear at home, we don't use bad language. I thought it was important for them to see what it felt like, to be strong, to speak out, and to have a voice. So that's been really awesome.
I love that. And a reminder from me is that I always say, don't be afraid of the criticism, because overwhelmingly, I think you will find that support, and that, outweighs any negativity. And it's hard to wade through that. So thank you, Anuja. We'll get back with you in just a moment later on in the program. At this point, I do want to get to the panel discussion itself. Alex and Tasneem, welcome, and thanks for joining us as they pop up on screen. A huge thanks to your organizations, RBC and Alex Partners, for their longstanding support and partnership with Ascend. Note the bios for these two individuals are on the website. Alex, I know, didn't want me to read it because yes, I do think it can be a little bit boring. So you can read those in your own time. So why not, let's get your response to Anuja's spoken word. I think that would be a really great way to kick things off. Maybe just take a second to share with us your reaction and why that resonated with you. Alex, I'll start with you first.
Well, thanks, Dion. Can everybody hear me? Great, fantastic. Thank you all for making the time out of your busy days to be with us. Having a chat with the group as we prepared for this. This is a tough topic, and I think everybody deals with it differently. And I just say I'm absolutely loving reading the chat on the right-hand side. So certainly for me, right-hand side. So please keep it up. Much like Dion, this was the second time I had a chance to hear Anuja, speak her spoken word. And the first time I heard it and the second time I heard it, there's a lot of nodding. I'm half Chinese, quarter English, quarter Irish. I was born and raised in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, but my family actually immigrated to Australia for a better opportunity of education, jobs, etc. And so I spent most of my formative years really trying to assimilate. And so much of, and I told Anuja this, so much of what she was talking about just like hit me like a ton of bricks. And, Dion, you touched on it. Many people in the chat touched on it. When you swore, which let's just be clear, we use a lot of inappropriate words to describe, I'm having a bad day, this food was whatever. When you use it in that context, it hit me like a ton of bricks, right? Because again, Dion, you touched on it, etc. like that. We don't. I'm 41 years old. I don't think I've ever said a swear word, to my Chinese dad, right? I think still to this day, oh, it's the worst, gosh darn it, etc. So I think when you talk through that, Anuja, it really personally hit me like a ton of bricks. And I think many people, as we can see in the chat, it resonates with. It's very, very real. So again, first and foremost, just really appreciate you for sharing what is clearly a very, very personal part of what makes you you. So kind of thank you.
I love that. And Tasneem, same to you. Your response was visceral almost. I remember the first time you heard Anuja's words.
Yeah, well, so first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for attending and being part of this community and this conversation. Yes, I heard Anuja speak her spoken word when we met as a group, and I have to tell you, it really affected me. It takes a lot of courage, so thank you, Anuja, for doing that. This is in many ways, for many of us, outside of our comfort zone, right? We talk about our professional work, we do what we have to do, but then to sort of open ourselves up and share how we experience the world around us is extremely personal and scary. So hats off to everybody for having the courage to have this really important conversation. In many ways, the solution that I see to all of the hatred around us is having these conversations and not hiding behind and not taking the safe path, because we can't improve unless we fight that good fight. So, for me as an Indian American, I came to this country when I was 6 years old with my parents and my sister. I faced a lot of what Anuja talked about, which is probably why it resonated with me. And I often thought, well, I'm actually one of the lucky ones. I have a family that loves me. I have means. I have now education and all of this. So I'm one of the lucky ones. But actually, it's the microaggressions that become the macroaggressions, and it has to stop somewhere. And yes, and there's bullying. There's been so much bullying, not just for me in my life, but now I see it with my kids, and that's where the line I draw the line. So,
yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm going to go off script for a moment, because I really want this to be organic. When you touched upon microaggressions and bullying, there is this buzzword right now of allyship among corporations, people in the workplace. And I think it's hard for people to grasp what that truly means, when you encounter it. And for me, it is the times when you have someone chime in when you're pitching a story that matters to you, someone who may be from a different background, and say, hey, I can't relate to this necessarily, but I do think your point is valid. And to me, that's almost just enough. One sentence is enough in those small instances of showing allyship. So while we're on the subject, Tasneem, can you talk about maybe some ways that you foster that within the workplace? How do you get people to become an ally? It's hard. It's easier said than done, isn't it?
It's much easier said than done, but I do think that it has to start with authentic conversations. If you don't share how you experience something, and you don't help somebody understand how you're experiencing something, you cannot you cannot sort of feel comfortable. And until you feel comfortable that you can talk about whatever it is that's important to you, I don't think you can be an ally, nor can someone be an ally to you. So for me, a lot of this is education and authentic conversations, and having those uncomfortable conversations in appropriate ways, finding ways to speak so that you don't shut the other person down, but finding ways to communicate in ways that you can be heard without compromising your message. It's not easy, but it has to be done.
Yeah, that sense of being uncomfortable, I think, also gets coupled with the idea of fear. Alex, I saw you nodding your head. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, look, I think Tazan, you hit the nail on the head. I think authenticity is a word that I think really resonates. I've had many interesting conversations, and I always appreciate, and if you're in this room and feel that same way, please, everyone's entitled to a view and opinion. But I was sharing with some people recently. I was talking to a peer of mine who, 9 times out of 10, everyone would pick and say, okay, got a great job, all this type of stuff that goes with it. And I was talking to him, and he talked about this notion that his circle of friends, or his peer network, didn't really understand that there was this like anti-Asian like sentiment. And I was kind of like, what do you mean? Right, like as in, oh yeah, we kind of get it, but is this stop Asian hate thing real? And for me, that's they weren't being rude. They weren't. There was no anger or aggression in this conversation, but it was, to me, this great opportunity to try to build that allyship, to try to get people to understand. And I think that people have to understand, first. And there's some great stuff happening in the chat here. Maybe we need to be a little bit more blunt and direct in how we communicate this. I would say, as someone who comes from a mixed background, I always describe it. If I ask my father, who's Chinese Malaysian, what should I do? And, a very common tactic will be patience, big son, hard work, loyalty. If I speak to my mother, who is an incredibly fiery Irish English lady, she will tell me, you've got to be your own champion. You've got to do those types of things. And so I do think some of it is around this allyship and this authenticity. But I think it also relies on us being, maybe a little bit more direct in kind of cutting to the chase. This is an issue. There are hundreds of people on this call. There are many comments happening in the chat right now, and this is just a very, very, very small cut of our kind of demographic across North America and around the world who see this as an issue. And so I think interracial allies, etc., is hugely important to what we do.
1000%, Alex. And so many things came to mind that even if you look at the chat, not everything is rainbows and hearts and stars and happy times sharing, right? There is some pushback, and that's okay. And I want us to be okay with that. And I think on the notion of people not understanding anti-Asian sentiment, I wrote that down. And along when I was taking that note, was the term of fake news, because over the course of my reporting over the past couple years, people have said, oh, you're just blowing this out of proportion. This is just a way to get clicks and likes on your social media or on your website, because people don't fully grasp how real some of the tensions are and the tensions that have manifested into violence. And that brings me to my next question, because look, law enforcement officials, they have told me over the course of my reporting that this is not a new phenomenon. These attacks, the underlying hate has been going on for decades, for centuries. It has not made its way to the forefront. The mainstream media has not covered it as much. It has been referred to me as America's dirty little secret. Alex, you know that it's not. Tasneem, are you surprised by any of this? How people have responded to some of the news in the news cycle? Were you aware of the hate? I know you've been aware of the discrimination and the bullying, but to this level.
Yeah, I guess I don't know I don't know that I can say yes at this level, because this is why it's still so shocking to me. But we all experience this hate in micro ways. Now, I think we've seen the growth of the hatred, or at least the courage to act on the hateful feelings has somehow, I think, sort of been unleashed in recent years. And so in some ways, I'm grateful to see the public news and sharing and information of it. I'm grateful because you can't have change without sort of understanding that it's happening. And I don't think we Asians talk about it much, partly for cultural reasons, but I am surprised, and yet part of me is not surprised, which makes me a little sad. But I myself have increasingly found people are bolder to speak to me in ways that are shocking, and that's to someone like me who has means and who has the ability to understand what my rights are and all of this. And so imagine if this is happening to me, how this happens to other people. So and that's, yeah. So it's both surprising and unsurprising.
Maybe Dion, if I could jump in, and so everybody, I do have the pleasure of joining you from Toronto, Canada. I did see a couple of our Canadian kind of like fellows as well join us. So great to be here. And I've got a privilege of being part of Ascend Canada. So there, just for context, there is a connection into Ascend. But I think a lot of people, in the US and around the world, we see what's happening in the US and we kind of go, but it doesn't happen in Canada, and I think a lot of people in Canada just assume it's not happening, and without being rude, you don't have to do more than some very basic secondary research on our dear friends Google, etc., like that, to find that, it does happen in Canada. Right. We're obviously a significantly smaller from a population background country than the US, but, Pan Asians coast to coast here in Canada have seen a 300% increase in anti-Asian hate crime over the last couple of years. And in hotspots, Vancouver, British Columbia, for those of you who don't travel, is a very large ports for East Asian immigration coming from mainland China, et cetera, like that. And El Wong has actually in the chat there just brought it up. It's a 700% increase, right? And so, and I would say that for a number of reasons that I likely won't get into, we don't necessarily have the same the same gun crimes, et cetera, like that, because we have just very different policies on it. But a 700% increase in whether it be microaggressions right up to physical violence. I mean, if you scale that out, is huge. And so when I look at things like that, it's not, and again, like I said, I hope we are keeping we're going to copy this chat down because there's a bunch of stuff going on there. But I would just say, I mean, I think some of it is just we don't see it in the news in the US, etc. If you don't see it in the US, etc., it's buried here in Canada, right? It's not a secondary, it's a tertiary, etc. kind of footnote.
And it's almost buried here too, because unless there is someone like myself, or I have a counterpart in New York City, his name is Safan Kim, he and I have spearheaded this, and I worry that if for some reason we no longer are part of our organizations, who will carry the torch and who will continue to bring these to the spotlight? And the problem is that those statistics are incredibly shocking. I'm glad you called out El Wong and that stat coming out of Vancouver, because even though they're astronomical, I guarantee you that the numbers are actually even worse than that, because you have a problem with reporting. You have a fear, you have a cultural stigma with talking to police. And also, more often than not, I hear from Asian Americans who are attacked and say, oh, no one's going to care, nothing's going to happen. There is a deeper systemic problem that prevents them from wanting to get these things on the record. So without proper statistics and reporting, we cannot get that action at a greater level. And that is a really big problem. I think it would be appropriate to address Leah's question right about now. I'm going off script again, but she asked, can we discuss the generational differences? Because Tasneem, you and Alex both mentioned this. I mentioned it as well, that if I brought up problems within my workplace early in my career of how to handle a situation, the response from my elders would be, keep your head down, keep your nose clean, and that is the way to success. And I thought that was the way to success because it had been working until several years ago. So Tasneem, I see you nodding your head. I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. I mean, that has been my philosophy for decades, because that's how it was taught to me at home. Anytime I'd come home with some kind of issue or problem, I was told, just ignore other people, just do what you know is right, and everything will be fine. And for years, I followed that recipe, and I, would not. And this is probably why Anuja's words spoke so directly to me, I would not speak up. I did not speak up, and I just tried to be the best that I could do with whatever I was doing. And I saw another chat that said, we need to get power and money, and that's the way we make change. I had a professor at Wellesley, where I went to college, who said to me, just keep your head down and get as far as you can, as fast as you can, and then you will be able to sort of make the rules. Maybe, but now I see with my children who are young adults, that in fact that they have faced similar, perhaps stronger kinds of hatred in their own life, and they were born and bred American, right? So how is this? It's the color of their skin, it's their name, it's their whatever the cultural stuff that they sort of identify with that sort of distinguishes them. But my children are not quiet. My children have taught me how to speak up and when to speak up and the need to speak up. And and I realized that we have to speak up. So.
And for you, Alex, how do you foster that speaking out when it can not only be scary, but I don't like it when the pendulum swings the other way, and then I get the criticism of, oh, you're a vigilante, or you're just being an angry Asian person.
I can't remember who it was. I think it was Joe in the chat said, let's be honest, being authentic is tough. It's not easy. It's not. Right. I think it's very easy to say, words that were given, I'm sorry, etc., like that. To mean it and to consistently mean it, I think is much kind of different. And just maybe, Tasneem, to touch on yours, I think about it, and I think that we have to speak up. If I think about your kids. And like you said, it's not that they're not even making necessarily a conscious decision. They're just saying, this is who I am, and I'm gonna stand up for it. We as adults, as we get a little bit older, etc., like that, and I can't remember if we were having this conversation, but well, actually, I know exactly it is part of the conversation that we're gonna have later on in this. But it's like there are, I wish we could do this. Like, put your hands up if you're worried about posting your experiences on social media, etc., like that, because you feel that you're going to have like negative repercussions, from a career perspective. Oh, I don't know, Alex, he spends a lot of time talking about these issues, etc. I think we have to get past that. I think we, one of the things that we certainly champion for at Ascend Canada is significantly stronger and more visible Pan-Asian leadership. I have the distinct pleasure of don't hold it against me, the distinct pleasure of being one of our corporate officers at the Royal Bank of Canada. And I personally take that on as a mission that I need to drive significantly stronger diversity and inclusivity inside corporate Canada. Right. Corporate Canada doesn't solve the goddamn atrocities that we saw with things like the Atlanta shooting. But, as you again, sorry, I point to the right, respectfully, we probably have a stronger voice in politics. We have a stronger voice in corporate Canada. We have there's the ability for us to lean into that, to drive, I think personally, a huge knock-on effect into our communities, into our children education, etc. By no means am I saying that corporate, U.S. or Canada is where it's all about. It's not. But I think that there is a very, very large, as again, I think, Tasneem, you mentioned this as well. Someone was talking about you need like money and you need power and you need education. I think there is a large, very rich, no pun intended, vein of Pan-Asian talents across, Canada, the US, etc., like that. And I think respectfully, we need to get a little bit louder and we need to take a little bit more of a vocal stance. And I want to be very clear when I say that. By no means am I saying that I just speak from my heart and Anuja, coming back to yours. Like, I'll tell you this right now. I am in two minds about swearing. It's so funny. I swear my life. If you met my team, they'll tell you I swear, etc., like that. I'm in two minds about swearing. But the reality of the situation I was thinking of was I think that we need to be significantly louder. We need to be bolder, and if that's going to have repercussions, as an example, for me with my career or whatever like that, quite frankly, I don't want to work for an organization that doesn't value that. And I would say to everybody on the call, I think we're experiencing this right now. It's, the power is in the employees' hands, not the employers. And if you're working for an organization who you think is going to look down on you for being upset about what's happened in our Asian community with these goddamn atrocities, it's, again, very easy, very privileged for me to say that, but I'll just tell you this right now. I'm not working there. I'm not going to deal with you. I'm not going to use your product and service. I'm not going to give my life to you. And so I think, I think vigilante is a very strong word, Dion, but I would say, I think we need to be louder. I think we need to be more vocal. And I think with our kind of Pan-Asian community, I think the only way we really know how to do it is to do it together.
That is so well said. I'm giving a internal, yes, Alex, as you're saying all of that. And that brings me to the next question that I have. And Tasneem, you and I spoke about this briefly during the prep call, that sometimes others, they see that they don't feel like they have that voice or can comment necessarily on the Asian, the spa shooting in Atlanta, people who may be Asian, but not Chinese, or, certain parts of Asia. They didn't feel, they felt awkward or uncomfortable in commenting. I see a number of people who are not Asian American on this forum discussion, which gives me great pride and encouragement that this is a subject that is interesting. What direct message do you want to say to those who are not Asian American? Because to me, my biggest thing is to say it's okay to ask us questions. If you don't understand something like how to pronounce our name, or some of our customs, some of our traditions, why we feel so compelled to speak out, that sort of opens the door to getting people to have that conversation. What would you say to them?
Oh, I absolutely remember our conversation, and I agree that we have to be, I think we all have the obligation to be open to educating and talking, to teach people about who we are, why we do certain things the way we do, what the significance of a certain practice or a certain tradition is to our lives and to our families and so forth. Because I think when we do talk about it and reciprocate the questions about somebody else's cultural heritage and all of that, I think we find that we're more similar than different. And that's really how allyship builds. Ultimately, we all bleed blood, we all cry tears, we all laugh when we see something funny, or you feel that when our kids blossom, and so I think there's so much that human beings share, that if we're not willing to talk, if we do talk, we break down the ignorance and the fear, and we're left with the feeling of sistership and brothership and brotherhood, and it's not really about whether you and I look the same, it's that we are the same. It doesn't. And so I think when you start talking, the barriers do start to fall. And I have found that people are usually hesitant or shy or embarrassed, plain old ignorant sometimes. And it's upon us to help educate and give permission to ask questions. I often say my name is not that hard to say, but it's surprising how many people can't say my name. And I often introduce myself, and I find people then don't use my name. And so because they can't remember it or worried that they'll mispronounce it. So I openly say my name, and I say, ask me again if you forget. I completely understand that it's hard to remember names. And I find that when I give permission to ask, more people are more likely to ask.
Yeah, because they know that the response is not going to be with offense. It's going
That's
to be
right.
met with understanding and with the goal of education for everybody. Alex, I don't want to put you on the spot, but Cindy writes in to ask a really great question, because I have a very parallel experience to her. She asks, how do you find the courage to speak up when you're the only Asian person around? Asian voices are being ignored, especially in areas with large Asian populations, but I'm afraid to speak up as someone living in a Midwestern suburb. I worked and lived in Kansas early in my career. I know you have lived a number of places. Where do you even begin? I know it's a big question, Alex.
That is, and maybe this is where some of my bio actually would have helped. So yeah, I've had the pleasure of living and working in Malaysia, Australia, Singapore, the UK, Germany, Russia, Tanzania, the US, Canada. I think I may have missed some of that as well. And it is a great question. I actually moved to a wonderful but very small town in Australia, and someone, I think it was Inga, was talking about, just don't ask me where the good Chinese food is or something like that. There was only two Asian families in that township. There was myself and another family, and the ongoing joke for the whole community. And they didn't see it as let's say being rude. They thought it was funny, but it was like, are you the Chinese family, that own that Chinese restaurant? Or are you, like, I'm being very serious. Like, we still to this day now, my siblings and I talk about it. It was like, it was either them or it was us, respectfully, I wish, my dad's an architect and stuff like that. I would have much preferred to have grown up in a household with some good food, etc. like that. But I think it's tough. I think it's I've spent a lot of time in places like Omaha, Nebraska, etc. like that, and I got a huge fan of the area and got a lot of friends there, etc. But even as a mixed, again, half Chinese, half Caucasian, I'm still an absolute oddity to them. I cannot even imagine what it would like for many on the call, including yourself, Dion, including yourself, Tasmin, what it would like to not have any type of kind of connectivity to them. I've always been incredibly lucky, and I do mean it, that I've been able to lean into, in some sides, both sides of the camps. And I will just tell you this, someone said to me, not that long ago, they were like, hey, is it nice being able to kind of play both cards? And they didn't mean it in any kind of like rude way. But if one thing I could share, and I'm sure we have a bunch of mixed individuals on the call, but the reality is, for most of my life, I actually haven't felt like I've actually been fully accepted in either camp. And I maybe that's a silly thing to say, but I can assure you, I still go back to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and my dad and his side of the family, who respectively all look like Malaysian Chinese, except for me and my siblings. They don't understand this notion of kind of like racism between, for lack of better terms, Caucasian and Pan-Asians. There's sadly a lot of racism in Malaysia between, Indian, native Malay and Chinese, but this notion of white, etc. like that isn't so much of an issue. So I think it's tough. I think it's really, really tough. I think you need to surround yourself, Cindy, with people who at least are going to give you that opportunity. And I think, Tasmin, you really, again, hit the nail on the head. All of us need to, I would say, consistently make our allies or other individuals feel comfortable in asking questions. If you cannot pronounce, my last name, it's Pay, like P-A-Y, right? A true story. I spent a lot of my career at PayPal. People thought that was absolutely hilarious. When we were having my first child, everybody was like, if it's a girl, are you gonna name her Apple? And I was like, why? And they're like, she could be Apple Pay. Again, whatever. But it's I know. But I think it really is about giving people space, giving people option to ask questions, but I think, Cindy, it's really tough when you're surrounded in a community that doesn't look like you, talk like you, dress like you, act like you. And I know that's not actually the case in 2022, but in a lot of cases, I think it's really, really tough. And you just got to really kind of take the higher ground and lean into this notion of how can you educate, how can you champion that?
Yeah, and Alex, I think the joke, as horrible as it is, if that is a way to get people to remember, I don't know, part of me thinks using humor has been very helpful.
Can I jump on that, like, if I could, like, and my apologies, Dion, for interrupting, but I would actually say I've spent most of my adult, and I'm going to say adult from early to, I've used humor as a defense mechanism, most of my kind of like adult life. If you want to talk about me and my bad taste in clothing, if you want to talk about me and my bad taste in sporting team, sadly I live in Toronto, but I'm actually a huge San Antonio Spurs fan. Don't come attack me on that. I think that, that's fine. But I would say that in general, I kind of feel that personally, I want to get away from using humor when it comes to things like this. And I don't mean that in any critical way of anyone. Every single person copes with, everybody single way copes with it in their own way. So I'm not being critical, but for me personally, I look at it and I go, if I smile, if I nod, if people, take in any way, shape, or form that this kind of topic of kind of diversity and inclusivity and kind of Asian hate, I think for me, it's not about going a complete, 180 and being, let's say, aggressive, but I certainly am trying to take a more somber tone and just educate people. This is a real problem, and again, there's a number of people in the chat who are saying it does happen in Canada. We're a very large organization that employs about 40,000 people in Canada, or about 90,000 people around the world. I've had many conversations with RBCers, as we affectionately call each other, who say they're walking along the street in cities and towns all over Canada, and people are winding down their windows and saying, "Go home, take that flu back with you," throwing stuff out. One of my good friends, Alan, I won't, give his last name away, but Alan said, he was literally walking along and someone was threw a drink out of their car and said, "Go home," And so for me, just on that note, I know it was just thing, but I personally have just tried to, I tackle a lot of things with humor as a defense mechanism. This is one where for me personally, I'm yeah, it's not something I'm even going to smile about. It's a very serious kind of topic,
Yeah, I think of humor is a gateway in a way, because I saw in the chat someone said that they had gotten called banana, being yellow on the outside and white on the inside. And my mom called me that, along with Twinkie, growing up. And I've kind of tried to use that as a learning term, a way to educate, but also have that underlying very serious discussion about the struggle. It's not easy being a banana. That's, that's kind of the phrase that I use. I am looking at the clock. I know we only have a couple minutes before we have to move on, but Tasneem, do you have any parting words that you would like everyone to take away? If there was just one thing, because we unloaded an awful lot, what would that be?
Yes, I think it's so apparent from this conversation, that would be, we're not alone. And remember, we stand together, and together we're much stronger.
Couldn't say it better. And you, Alex?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, there are safe spaces. There are organizations like Ascend and Ascend Canada who are trying to champion and be these forums for us to speak up. I think, I do think that this is really something that we need to solve as a community, as a tribe. And I think every single person, again, like I said, this is just a really engaging chat. So thank you all on the right-hand side. I think everybody's got different approaches, but certainly, the one or two overwhelming themes that I'm seeing on the other side is that people do, see this and believe that this is a serious problem that we need to address. And again, I'm probably maybe a little bit reluctant to use the word aggressive, but I do think that maybe we need to take a firmer stance in how we communicate, how we share. And I know we've got Michelle coming up afterwards, which I think you'll really just enjoy that. We've had a chance to kind of see it, but Anuja earlier, like I said, there was nothing, respectfully, Anuja, there was nothing remotely, anybody who took offense with that, my apology, but there's nothing offensive. That's real, that's human, that's coming from your heart, from your emotions, etc., like that. And so I do think that maybe some of these, for lack of a better word, these powerful moments need to happen a little bit more consistently.
So well said from the both of you. Stick around. I want to take 10 minutes to read off some questions and comments. And if you feel so compelled, either one of you, to jump in, just go for it at this point. There are so many comments, so many questions. It's really encouraging, because earlier on we were nervous to say, will people be open to sharing these stories? And I think this just goes to show, how we all feel supported right now in this space, albeit virtual one. Rick, I want to highlight, says, I think we need to stop telling our kids to be doctors, lawyers, engineers, and accountants. And we need to start telling our kids to run for politics, maybe not necessarily politics, but that you can be something else. And for me, it was a very big departure. My father was a chemist. I got C-, maybe D grades in chemistry class. I had no interest in it. And it was almost unheard of to be a journalist. And it was really Connie Chung, who I saw on my television, even though it was a joke in the Midwest when people would wave at me in public. But really, she gave me the inspiration that, yeah, someone who looks like me does belong on television. So that was, very poignant for me. As I scroll through some more of these comments, I love this. Marjorie writes in to say, I am not Asian, but wanted to be here to support those because I feel pain about the horrific stories in the news. We need to support each other as human beings. Thank you for that. I think that allyship outside for the AAPI community is so crucial. And I do get, on a note of seeing these reports, I did ask the organizers of this panel, I said, hey, that second slide I showed of the people who were beat up, their faces are a little bit bloodied. I've been in organization talks, Fortune 500 companies, you name it. And sometimes people say it's a little too graphic, and I understand that. But I do also understand at the same point, the people need to see the gravity, and people, just like Anuja using the expletive that she did, people need to see, the brutality. And if it takes an image like that, it is not because of, wanting to be sensational. It is because it gets people to wake up. Will wants to say, learn about other cultures as well. Be informed, learn about cultures. I always ask to pronounce someone's name correctly. It was also suggested by someone else to put in your email a pronouncer, because that's an easy way to not have to explain. So I really love that idea. Let's see, Deanna saying that she could not agree with you more, Tasneem, on your latest point, on your last point. Anuja, you also wrote to a woman named Tanya saying, thank you. It is so hard to speak up. Last year, someone, a large white man, rammed their cart into me at the grocery store. He huffed off, swerved around me. I knew I needed to say something, but I didn't. I was too nervous to cause a confrontation, especially in our polarized political climate. And that's even an incident where you don't even know if it's necessarily race-based, but something that, I think our brains are sometimes wired to, they're in a state of shock because you don't expect something to happen. So you don't know what to say necessarily until you look back. Let's see, Alex and Tasneem, if you have anything that you'd like to flag as well, please feel free to, but I'm scrubbing through these. I like this as well. Rick says, with all of this Asian hate, I told my Asian parents I'll give up my C-suite title, my money, my time to run for politics and defend and fight our community, hoping this will raise us up to help my parents. To my surprise, my parents told me not to do it. They think it is too much of a risk, too scary. Asians should be quiet. I hear that often from others as well in the community. Let's see. Privileged or not, nothing to do with the level of scrutiny. And let's see.
Can I just quickly jump in here, Dion? Leslie just brought one up in here, a little bit more career focused, talking around we need more executive search consultants and help appointments for Asians in a Fortune 1000 C-suites. That to me is like anchor in education. We need to, organizations like Ascend Canada, we need to work with these firms to educate them on kind of like bias training, et cetera, like that. And I think that that's really, really important. And the reason I say it is I know the amount of times that people say to me, like, they weren't in consideration for A, B, C, D. And if you do look at the common denominator, it's that they come from, quite frankly, another ethnic background. And so I think that, Leslie, that's a great one. I just think it's really, really important that we need to educate and train people that there is sometimes, even at times, there's just, indiscriminate bias here.
And on that education front, Tasneem, maybe you could jump in on this one. Lisa suggests asking, how are you coping? And that opens the door to showing that you care. I mean, it seems so simple, but something that I've taken solace in is when people just say, hey, I just wanted to check in. I know you've covered a lot of hard things, or hey, this is a news story. Did you see this? Do you have some of those, hands-on techniques that you use or that you would like to see people use?
Yes, certainly. I think just especially for allies, just checking in after something happens, or if you may not even know something's happened, but you can see that the person who experienced it isn't doing well. It's really wonderful. It's a wonderful human thing to check in. Actually, we see this. So I'm at a company called AllyShip, and we have some wonderful leaders in the company. And one of the things I really appreciated, and I try to do it myself, after something horrible happens, just check in with people, share your own reaction so that people realize if you're talking about it, it's okay for them to talk about it. And so in that way, you can give permission implicitly instead of explicitly as well. But yes, there are the little actions. The other one I really just want to say out loud is hiring, especially those of us who are leaders in our company and making hiring decisions. When I even have my team pull, applications or candidates to review and so forth, I want to make sure I see a broad spectrum of people, of philosophies, of color, of you just name it, because I just think the problems begin when we just see all white, and sorry, but all white male. So
can I maybe just quickly tack onto that, Tazin, because I think that's great. I think it was actually Stuart Butterfield at Slack or someone in his team who talked about this a few years ago. And his perspective on hiring, this was actually in relation to hiring females, but I think it's absolutely relevant to quite frankly, hiring more Asians. Mm-hmm. He just said, he said he spoke to his recruiters and just said, I want to over leverage and over dip into seeing female candidates. If we've got 100, if we're going to have 100 applicants come in, et cetera, like that, I don't want it to be 50-50. Actually, I'm making it up. I want it to be 60-40. And his rationale behind it was that if we see more women, if we see more Asians, right, there's a higher likelihood and probability that we will hire them, have an incredible knock-on effect, where those Pan-Asian leaders, those hiring managers that you referenced, as in many people again on this call, again, it's not to say we're always going to do it, but I think there is a significantly higher probability of that happening if we see more and more people who look and sound and act like us.
I mean, it has to be mindful to think that things will just happen by luck or chance. No, we've got anything you want in life, you have to be mindful about. So, and this is an important mindful action.
I see that in my industry as well. There's a shortage of Asian Americans on the air, and also in particular men. And I think that goes back to the cultural stigma of this is not an acceptable job, because you cannot tangibly measure success in this business. You only know it from the paycheck, because that's always the first question. As I moved up the ladder, my parents asked me, how much money are you making? Because that was the only way they could gauge it. And it was not until I was maybe about 35, 37, I don't even remember, that my father told me that he was proud of me. And the only reason why he did that was because he saw me on 2020, which is on a network level. They live in Connecticut, I live in California. So I think it's also fostering that we did mention it earlier on, that it is okay to be something else that you are not quote unquote supposed to be. And that is how you get more of these applicants at a lower level. But it's going to take time, obviously. It's not like overnight you're going to find a bunch of qualified applicants either. So I'm glad you brought that up. Being mindful of the time, thank you both for all of your insights. I know we could probably go on for another couple hours at this rate. So please, everyone, continue to put your comments in the chat. I know people would like to save the chat. Hopefully we can do that so we can maybe review afterwards. And I do also recommend everyone to connect with both Tasneem and Alex on social media, and then also on LinkedIn, if you so desire. I am Dion Lim TV. So
maybe if I could, just that, like, team, as a quick aside, yes. My name is Alexander. So if you are looking for me, this is true story. There's only 2 Alex Pays. There is a Chinese German pianist called Alex Pei. Wow. And there is a Chinese English banking exec called Alexander. Like, we both call each other Alex, but I have to call myself Alexander because I always joke he is the famous Alex Pei.
There is only one other Dion Lim, and it is an Asian male who happens to live in the Bay Area, and he is some CEO of some tech company. Fantastic. So it's just so funny like that. I don't know if Tasneem, you have a name doppelganger also.
No, I'm very easy to find. I'm out there, so find me.
I love it. Please do. And please do continue to speak out to the both of you. I can't thank you enough. I feel like I have some lifelong friends now. Perfect. All right, let's move on with our program. We have another phenomenal speaker to bring to the forefront. Her name is Michelle Ng, and she is an Ascend Lifetime member. She is going to share her story with us and lead us through the next segment. Michelle.
Dion, thank you so much for hosting this forum. And thanks to Ascend for providing this global platform for us to learn from each other and share our stories. There are two sides to being an AAPI in the workplace: a side that is seen and a side that is hidden. On one side, AAPI professionals seem well represented. We are highly employed and we are high earners. But on the other side, long-held bias toward our community make us less likely to be promoted to leadership levels or be perceived as leaders. Consequently, only 2% of C-level roles, 4.6% of executive roles, and 5.8% of managerial roles are held by AAPIs. So last year, Ascend launched a highly successful initiative called the Other Side Campaign to shine light on the reality where AAPI leaders share their other side stories. Some of the sentiments that we heard include, I'm least likely to be promoted to a leadership role. I was told I don't act like a leader. I was labeled as a technical one. I was not heard in the workplace. I struggled to ask for what I deserve. I was reduced to the model minority. And to share my story, here's my other side video. This Friday will mark the 2-year anniversary of the World Health Organization declaring COVID-19 as a global pandemic. On the topic of anti-Asian racism and bigotry, many stories, heartbreaking stories, are set in the context of COVID. But the lack of common understanding and coverage in typical education curriculum is what caused many people to think that this is just a COVID phenomenon. It's not. And it's actually been really difficult for me and others to articulate the challenges of being and living as an Asian American. Last year, I attempted to articulate my personal thoughts in a LinkedIn article titled The Invisible Anguish of Being a Model Minority. I'll share a small passage. While anti-Asian sentiment is not new and often heightened during a crisis, the last year has been particularly challenging for me. As I scrambled to purchase foods and supplies before lockdown in New York City last March, I witnessed and encountered micro and outright aggression on the bus, in the store, and walking in the street. Lunar New Year has always been the most significant holiday in my family. While the pandemic has made it much more difficult, I did my best to honor a few traditional rituals to celebrate. I cherish each red envelope I receive from an elder because it symbolizes the centuries of blessings and well wishes passed across many generations. The latest surge of violence has hurt more because the victims remind me of elders whom I revere. Sadly, the reported incidents are only a small sample of the rising tide of hate against Asian Americans. In addition to underreporting, it is rare for anti-Asian violence to be prosecuted as a hate crime. There's also a pattern that attention to non-white groups is only as pressing as the injuries that they have suffered. Before I published the story, I spoke to many different people because I was worried. Did I use the right words? Did I provide sufficient data? Will I embarrass my family? Will I bring shame to my community? Will I attract some crazy internet trolls? This experience helped me reflect on how I'm culturally conditioned to suffer in silence or eat bitterness. There's a Chinese proverb that attributes the ability to persevere as a measure of one's virtue. In some ways, I'm also exhibiting what's known as minor feelings. According to an excellent Asian American author, Kathy Park Hong, minor feelings occur when Asian optimism is forced upon you, which contradicts your own radicalized reality, thereby creating a static of cognitive dissonance. You're told things are so much better while you think things are the same. I'm going to continue to do what I do to bring light to what's happened. I'm grateful to see AASCEND's COVID 5-point action agenda. And I have subsequently published an article on the 5 ways to stop Asian hate as an ally. Thank you so much for listening to my story. There's been countless times in my life when I felt like I did not belong, be it in the community or in the workplace. AASCEND is on a journey to enable organizations to foster a sense of belonging for all, especially us, the AAPIs, and amplify allyship, especially inter-Asian allyship. Today's forum is just one example of that effort. In a recent AASCEND event, when we asked the question, what belonging means to you, one of our members said, in the analogy of inclusion, it is being invited to the dance. And belonging means you feel like you can show up to the dance regardless if you want to dance. Another member said acceptance, connection, and identity. Belonging means different things to different people, and being able to accept and work is the meaning of true inclusion. This brings us to our audience poll. We have 2 questions for you. Please launch the first poll. Looks like we have a lot of people who say they feel like they belong most of the time or sometimes, but we also have some of the folks who say they never feel like they belong. And so for those of us here, I want us to think about what it means for us to create a culture of belonging and what we can individually do or collectively do together to create allyship. I think this is probably a good segue to the second question. As an AAPI professional, I practice inter-Asian allyship in the workplace. It looks like we have a lot of people who practice inter-Asian allyship most of the time or sometimes in the workplace, but we also have folks who have indicated they haven't done that. So again, I challenge for all of us to think about what it means to do that. And if you have any particular thoughts or things that have worked well for you, I would invite you to share how you're practicing inter-Asian allyship in the workplace in the chat window so that we can share some of that with our audience. I hear something about supporting ERGs or BRGs in the workplace. I think they're really great ideas. I also see things about articulating what it means that when they don't feel like they belong, and be able to have the environment to share that and be able to help our colleagues understand what that means. There's something about, there's a difference between practicing allyship and being motivated to do it. I think all these are really good suggestions. And then there's a question from the audience about suggestions for people whose companies may not have ERG. So I'm wondering if there are some of you who may be able to share some of those. And I think, one channel is, invite your colleagues to join you in some of the Ascend events like what we're hosting today. Perhaps that will give them some ways to learn more about the issues and the ways that they can support you. I'm really loving all the conversations that's in the window. But I also want to make sure that, we offer an opportunity for Dion and Anuja to join us back in the program so that they can also share some of their thoughts. So we will have an open forum for you, our audience, to continue to ask questions and share their stories.
Thank you for that, Michelle. That was exceptionally powerful and I think generated a lot of discussion. I want to ask Anuja, now that you're back, you have gotten a lot of praise for your spoken word. What was it like hearing Michelle's point of view as well?
I mean, Michelle, it totally resonated with me. And I just think of my experience in, the work world, and as a consultant working in private equity, as an Asian American, and what I bring into the room, how people perceive me, and then what they don't see, and also what they might choose not to see. And they might say, I think a lot of us in the chat were talking about, oh, I forget you're Asian, or for me, oh, I forget you're Indian, or I don't see you as Indian, and, comments like that. But we hold these complex identities, as do everyone. But, when we come into the room, it's just sort of managing those expectations of you and then who you really are.
And I also think there are so many intricacies of navigating in the workplace as well. There was a question that I saw, and maybe Michelle, you can respond to this because you mentioned the trash can incident during your portion. Dorothy asks, what do you do when you speak up and you experience blowback in the workplace? Because again, it goes back to that theme of fear.
Yeah, I would say two things. I think one is find somebody you trust in the workplace to be able to have a real conversation with you. And I know that that's not always easy, right? But I think when you can articulate some thoughts to someone you trust and be able to think about the culture of the company that you work with, and I've been really fortunate to have a lot of colleagues who've been able to do that with me at EY, and really think about, okay, what does belonging mean for me and for others? And during the different challenges that we have, what does it mean to have a listening session? What does it mean to have an allyship session? And I think that has helped me. But in terms of blowback, yeah, there's definitely experience of that. And I think it's up to you to think about how to treat that. For me, when I was probably in my earlier part of my career, I probably took them as a much harder experience than I do now. Because the one thing that I have cherished more than ever over the pandemic is that time is one element that I will never gain back. So do I want to focus my time on people who refuse to understand or refuse to listen? Or am I going to do allyship with those who are willing to be empathetic and people who are willing to create a culture of inclusion?
And I almost would go so far as to say the blowback isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it goes back to that being uncomfortable. And yes, you are going to ruffle some feathers and make some waves. And you do have to take some of that and not internalize it, but maybe just eat it up as a loss, because still you have spoken out. And I think that will also you don't realize who you have impacted. And I sometimes, after I do speak out in the workplace, people afterward will come up to me and say, "Oh, I'm glad you said that." Right? You're
definitely
nodding.
Happened.
Yeah,
it's definitely
and
happened.
Yeah, and Anuja, you've probably been through that too, where it's like not, people on the surface you may not hear from, but behind the scenes, you definitely have much more support.
Yeah, and if I can add, I think there's people on this call at different stages in their career. I know for me, earlier in my career, I was a lot more scared to speak up. I didn't have the confidence. I didn't know my value. But I think at any stage of your career, you can speak up, but especially for those leaders, if we're able to speak up and be confident, it just sends a signal to, the other Asian Americans, other minorities, or anyone who's not feeling heard or seen, that it is a safe space for them to speak up as well.
Yes, and I think that having that lens of being through something can offer a comfort. So also don't forget the power that you hold within yourself to be a leader for someone else. Whew, we've covered a lot, haven't we? I just have to say, thank you to you both. Thank you for everyone for being here. I would love everyone to put their takeaways in the chat. We are looking at just 2 minutes left. So thank you all so very much for being part of this program, sharing your stories, getting so real, getting so raw. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you all, and not just during AAPI Heritage Month or on the anniversary of something tragic. Let's make this a year-round discussion, and that we can encourage our organizations individually to participate in. So with
Hear,
that, hear. Amen to our closing remarks, Marco. Okay, a quick reminder to everyone, we have these upcoming programs. You will see them on your screen, April 20th, the 27th, along with June, and also March onwards. You will see on your screen. Take a screen grab if you'd like to participate in those. Everything is at ascendleadership.org. You can go to that website and check that out. Next, we have a reminder on other engagement opportunities. Membership options, you can see there. I know many people have felt inspired. Perhaps this will trigger you to reach out to someone else who may not be a part of the Ascend group. I have, for the past several years, tried to involve myself as much as possible, most recently speaking at a scholarship event for young people. So, of course, at all different levels of careers. The Ascend Foundation is also at ascendleadershipfoundation.org. And a reminder, I've said this many times, I sound like a broken record, but please do connect with us, not only on an Ascend level at ascendleadership.org, but also the ascendleadershipfoundation.org. And you see all of the social media handles. There are too many for me to name off right now, but you can see if you do search Ascend, you should be able to find that. And as a reminder, all of our speakers, our panelists, please do find them online. I know the conversation will continue. And finally, our last slide, remembering the victims of hate crimes. This is just a small sample. Many of them, unfortunately, have almost blurred together because it's so hard to keep track. But some that really come to mind include one that I covered and broke exclusively was Visha Ratnapakdee. He's an 84-year-old Thai grandfather who was shoved and killed. It was caught on camera on January 28th, 2021. His case is still pending and working its way through the court system. It has suffered many setbacks, but people are still continuing to fight for his case. Pak Ho, another one that I broke, 75-year-old man. I referenced him, robbed and killed in Oakland last May on this day, to be exact. So with that, I encourage everyone to continue to be engaged, to continue to pay attention to these news stories, and also to continue to live without that fear of engaging with people within your organization on a micro level and on a macro level whenever possible. So with that, signing off, like I do in my news stories, I'm Dion Lim, ABC 7 News. Thank you.